kind of you. I appreciate that. You know, I'm a busy guy at my real day job, which is teaching golf here at Mediterra, Naples, Florida. And I don't get much chance to be good if it's, for instance, way too steep. You're either going to have all kinds of problems through the ball, or your body's going to fight to adjust. And once you've got a lot of compensations in there, it's difficult to get good, consistent contact. But assuming that's reasonable, what I really recommend, especially for impact, make it smaller and slower. Get a good, clear understanding of what you're trying to do. You're not trying to hammer down on it. You're trying to come in at the back of it with a little forward shaft lean, tilting the face slightly, and squeeze against the back of the ball. And just practice that on a very small scale till you can start to map in that feeling of tilting the sweet spot into the ball like that. Once you do it well on a small scale, make it a little bit bigger and go from there. But check to make sure nothing's way out of sorts as you start down club face plane or something.
Perfect. Okay, JJ the golfer did have a question here.
Okay, JJ.
When is the time to start the hip turn?
Well, let's talk about both. Backswing is pretty obvious, really. You really want the hips to, they provide some stability and resistance and balance in the backswing, but you don't want them so stable that you're unable to make your upper body turn. So depending on your flexibility, the general average is about back to the target. We'll call that 90 degrees and hips about 45. That can vary on flexibility. So the hips should react to the upper body on the way back, not vice versa. But coming down, the hips should be the leader. If you throw a ball, picture throwing a ball, your hips are going to go first, then your trunk, then your arm, then the ball. Same with a golf club. You want your hips to go first, and that gets everything loaded and gets everything in motion. Once they've gone, though, once they've made that move, they should start to stabilize, and they should be a base upon which you hit the shot. It's not only turn in the downswing, there's some lateral bump and movement as well. So I like to think of it as getting your left hip about over your left ankle. You don't want to be that anal when you actually hit. But as an average, it is not pure turn coming down.
Perfect. Danny Angel.
Danny Angel.
I'm a beginner. Do you have any easy tips for a beginner?
Yeah, I do, Danny. I think a couple of things as a beginner. Human beings are amazing with tools and objects. So if you have a clear picture roughly as to what you're trying to do, it really helps you get started. Again, as I was mentioning a few minutes ago, I'd make some swings without the ball at home, but let's assume you can hold it enough in the fingers with your pad of your hand on top enough you can hinge it. Two things that would be important as a beginner, just rough concepts. If you picture the shape of the club, picture a line drawn, if I'm doing that reasonably correctly, that's roughly the shape you're trying to move the club on. You're not trying to place it there. You're trying to get a little bit of pivot and do that. But if you get the club significantly out of balance, it's very challenging. The other thing I would be trying to do, so that's one broad concept, is you're trying to get a nice long low spot at the bottom of the swing. You don't want to bash down. You don't want to be lifting up. If you're going to start to be good, you've got to get a low spot so the club can strike the ball, stay low for a few more inches, and then go out there. And like any other sport that involves a ball, baseball, tennis, you can compress the ball better if you don't scoop at it too much. So nice level spot. Nice firm wrists with a reasonable swing plane. Just do it in slow motion a bit. Good mental concept helps a beginner, though.
Okay, Lynn from New Jersey.
Hey, Lynn from New Jersey.
So like most women, I have trouble with distance. What are some things I can improve or work on for distance?
Okay, things to improve or work on for distance. I mean, there's always club fitting. There's always physical fitness. It's not like I'm going to the gym every day, believe me. But those are factors for sure. But I think you have to look, first off, are you getting a quality strike? Not every time, but are you compressing it fairly well? Is it a square hit? We see so many times on video a glancing hit, ball doesn't compress very well. That's job one. Job two, once you've gotten that, is to add some speed. And there's several components for that. And they vary a little bit in terms of how they mixed in with people's bodies. You've basically got three: wrist cock, arm swing, and body pivot. So try to look at your own swing and say, hey, what's a good mix for me? Do I have a reasonable amount of all three there? And am I being, as we just talked about with, I think, JJ a minute ago, am I being dynamic enough coming down? So you've got to hit it solidly and squarely, number one, at least most of the time. No glancing hits. Club fitting could be a factor. And make sure your wrists are mobile, you're getting a good pivot, and you're accessing basically your power sources like that. One other quick thing, by the way, they know, those in the know in the golfing world, that unless you practice swinging a lot faster than you're comfortable doing at times in small bursts, you don't generally gain speed. So once you're fairly good with your technique, at times make 10 or 12 swings absolutely as quickly as you can. Hear the club swish through the air, then take it back down. Do that regularly.
Perfect. We've got over 1,000 people on different channels
We do?
watching.
Oh my goodness.
YouTube commenting is not working, but your sound is going to be the best on YouTube. We're connected to the YouTube phone. If your comments or questions are coming in there, we're not seeing them. We apologize for that. We have to go through some things with YouTube. There's a new update. All the other comments and questions are coming in, but I wanted to apologize first. We will fix that and go through that for the next live. And if you have these other channels, TikTok, Instagram, we're on there as well. We have a question from Jason.
Hey, Jason.
Tips on not topping the ball driving mid-range. So when he's driving and hitting mid-range shots,
he's topping the ball. Well, Jason, there's a couple of possibilities. One would be that your weight is so far back, you're catching the ball on the upswing. That's a reasonable possibility. I would say probably more likely as an average than that. A golfer creates too much angle of attack, if you like, too much steepness. Their subconscious senses this isn't going to quite work out. I'm going to smash the club in the ground, and they either tend to raise their body, or in the case of some golfers, they tend to raise their arms, and it's that inability to stay with the shot that causes a lot of top shots. So first thing I'd check, are you on a more, what I call a shallow swing plane, not one that's so steep? And if the club's coming in very low like that, picture an airplane coming into land, you can thump the wheels on the runway, and so in golf you can scrape the mat and commit to hitting the ground or the tee, as the case may be, if your angle of attack is good. That's the likely one, I'd say.
Perfect. Bill B.
LB?
Bill B.
Bill B.
What's the best tempo drill?
Tempo drill, well, that's an easy one. We have the Scratch Golf Academy app. It's got a whole plethora of things going. It's got putting tempo, full swing tempo, green reading. Seriously, it's at the App Store, Scratch Golf Academy. There's a lot of research, not specifically done by me, I might add, but that's accepted in the world of golf about full swing tempo, the basic 3-to-1 tempo. That is to say, it takes, in almost the cases of almost all tour pros, 3 times the length of time to complete the backswing as it does to return to the golf ball. And that's, of course, because there's some dynamic acceleration. But you'll see at the Scratch Golf Academy app, there's different mixtures of that. Some players have longer, sort of smoother swings. So the cadence is still 3-to-1, but it could be, for instance, 0.9 of a second versus, 2.7 seconds or whatever. What is it? I've got that wrong. What is it? 927.
927.
Exactly how that ratio goes in there. But it's got a nice beat, and it's a good thing to do. Remember, one little comment with tempo, though, in passing. We're talking full swing here. Don't get too slow. The idea is to be smooth and fluid, not slow. You won't hit the ball well going slowly. If you take it back too slowly, you're either not going to hit the ball very far, or your subconscious is going to sense you don't have enough energy and jump at it. So fluid and flowing. Check that Scratch Golf Academy app out, though.
And the app's in the App Store and Android Market.
Android Market.
Yeah.
I'm out on the road a little bit doing summer schools, by the way, ladies and gents, and if you're interested in that, go to adambgolf.com. You won't see all the information of it there, but you can register and reach out to us, and we'd be happy to get that information to you. We'd love to have you for a mini school or something out on the road sometime. So adambgolf.com, we're happy to reach out to you.
Okay, Irene in Canada.
Irene in Canada.
How do you hit your driver as a beginner? Some first tips for beginners.
Driver as a beginner, first tips. Okay, get it teed up. Several thoughts. You've got to get your stance reasonably wide. You probably know that. Tilt a little bit this way. We want to hit the ball on the way up and approximately off your instep. Here's what I would do, though. I would make some small swings with almost no wrist break where you create a really reliable, this sort of length, fairly level point in your swing, and it should have a little tiny bit of roundedness as produced by your pivot, and get the feeling of the motion at the bottom. Good drivers all have a good long level spot coming in that allows them to really make solid contact. The driver of all the clubs besets the sin, if you like, of the average golfer of getting too steep and jumping up through the ball. So level spots, 20-yard shots with a swing literally from there to there, and just keep building up. Once you do well with it, make some bigger swings and drop back down if you struggle.
Awesome. Samuel. Skier.
Samuel.
I have a huge problem with hooking my 4-iron to 7-iron, and I cannot fix it. Please help.
I occasionally have this same problem, Samuel. At least there is sympathy in the room. Well, almost always, someone that hooks the ball, clearly the club face is closed relative to the swing, but it would be very unusual for someone to be swinging out to in, because almost always, if they did close the face, they'd lose the ball every time. So almost always they're guys and gals that cut the ball. So here's what usually happens. Somehow or other, the club gets a little stuck or out of sync. Your body gets stuck and slows down too much, and then the hands get too active. Now, that should happen to some extent. To some extent in a good swing, once we've loaded the club, the body should stabilize a little bit to allow for a little bit of whip and pop, but it gets too drastic in the case of this sort of a player. So what I would try to do, I'd get something like a 7-iron, and I'd make some little mid-sized backswings, and I would make some nice hard punch shots. Hit a, I don't know what a punch shot would be for you, let's say 75 yards. And I would try to finish where your right arm, if I go towards the camera, is a little more across your body, and the face won't roll over so much when you do that. Not coming from here, but just synchronizing up so I can make a good firm stop, right arm more across my body, and get some good low punch shots, maybe even cut a few balls. And I think you'll get a feeling that will help you.
That's great. What's your best tip? This is Jay Kata from TikTok.
Okay.
What's your best tip for reading greens and chipping, ungulation? And
well, again, I'm not trying to be Mr. Promote the Scratch Golf Academy app. We do have a wonderful green reading app that helps you read amounts of break, helps you interpret where they are, and gives you some really good visuals for reading greens. But just to touch on it, I think most people don't read the green enough. They read the putt. The first thing they see is ball hole like that. Listen, if it's an obvious break, that'll do, but sometimes it's close to level. It will almost never be actually level on a green. And then it's confusing, but remember, if we're looking at the green this way, course designers like to run, they have to run water off the green. No puddling, it will ruin maintenance. And almost always it's back to front, give or take. You might get a little section at the back of the green that drops off, but the hole would be unplayable if the green pitched away from you. So always remember the bottom end of the green. You can see this from the fairway is the low spot. And remember, they're always trying to funnel water in and around bunkers. So you can sort of see how they make these runoffs. Once you have a sense of the green, once you get up on the green, if I've got a putt, let's say that's 8-9 feet and it looks pretty flat, but if I know the bottom of the green there and the top is there, well, it may not break much, but it isn't going that way, it'll go that way. And it's really the same reading chips. It's just knowing how the green's put together and built. Don't wait till you're just looking at ball and hole.
Love it. Someone on TikTok said, Adam, just from following Scratch Golf, you have taught me so much in my swing. You're a legend.
Oh, well, I am happy I've been able to help you. That's fantastic. You know, that's very kind of you to say. Sometimes I get some extremely negative comments on occasion, like probably everyone that posts videos does, but generally they're fairly positive. And I think the reason that they go over fairly well, hey, the course where I'm at, Mediterra, is beautiful and all that, that looks good. But since I teach golf full time, and I've been very blessed to be around some of the game's best teachers over the years, worked for David Leadbetter for 15 years, lots of other people. Obviously, you learn from people like that. But teaching full time over the years, you kind of sort of get a sense of what verbiage works, what images seem to resonate with people in certain things. So it's sort of like I've read that some comedians, if they have a big performance, say at some national award show, they'll go out on tour and try out jokes, see what people like, and get rid of the ones that aren't, you know. So thankfully, through all the teaching and all the people maybe I've messed up a little bit over the years, we get a little bit more of the good stuff to you guys. But that's kind of you to say. Thank you.
So this is from H. Lip on TikTok.
Hey, H.
My coworker almost spins out of his shoes when he drives the ball. What tips can I give him?
Coworker spins out of his shoes when he drives the ball. Well, as a guess, your coworker probably is swinging really hard, but as a guess, they probably lost a lot of their wrist angle, so they don't have that lag, they've lost their main power source or a large power source, and sometimes, particularly if someone's athletic and flexible, when their subconscious sense they don't have much to hit with, they will just spin their body as hard as they can trying to create some speed. It's a definite no-no. So the idea, hey, certainly put some weight in that front foot, let the wrists load a bit. But after that, we want some stability, some ground support to be able to really rip the club head through and do that. So see if they can get a little more bounce in their wrist, a little more wrist hinge, and start to use some snap of the wrist instead of all that body motion would be my guess. Otherwise, get some longer spikes maybe. That'll stick them in the ground.
Dwayne Bailey.
Dwayne Bailey?
What's the best tip for keeping your head down?
I'm not such a fan of keeping the head down as maybe a lot of people are, because I think what's important is that your body angle, which I'm attempting to mimic here, is reasonably stable through the shot. The ball doesn't really know where you're looking. Now, I'm not saying don't look at the ball, but a couple of thoughts. First off, the human eye doesn't see fast enough to actually see the ball get hit. People say they see it, they don't. It's physically impossible. Secondly, I think in many cases, when people fixate on the ball too much, two bad things happen. Fixate visually. Number one, they tend to swing too much at the ball and get steep. They don't swing from the side of their body out to the target. And two, if you like, piggybacking on that, is they become a little less target-oriented in their overall motion and a bit more ball-oriented. So I'm not saying don't stay down, but if you're topping a lot of shots, it's much more likely either your arms or your spine angle's changing than you're not looking at the ball enough. So I hope that's helpful.
Perfect. Rick has a question.
Rick.
Do you have some tips for chipping?
Chipping tips. Yeah, I think a couple of chipping tips. First off, let's say 3 general things. I was always cautioned back in my early teachings, don't give a number, because if you forget one, you look like an idiot. But I'm going to stick my head out and say there's probably about 3. Number 1, try to get your setup very impact-like. So I like to get my feet close together. I don't want my hands way forward, but I want that ready, set sort of a position. You don't have much time to move, so get yourself set. Picture someone bunting in baseball. There's a certain readiness that you see. Number 2, get a little closer to the ball. So if my normal, this is a 7-iron, if my normal 7-iron's here, I'm going to shorten up and get closer to the ball. Makes it easier to hit it solidly, number 1. Secondly, when you're nearer the ball, the swing takes on more of a straight putting type of an arc, less of a rounded an arc, much better for chipping. And thirdly, we don't want to be rigid, but you want to minimize wrist action and just get a little bit of trunk and arm movement. It makes for a much more, not rigid, not no wrist action, but a much more repeatable stroke. So hopefully those 3 tips are helpful for you.
Okay, this is Finley.
Finley.
Any tips for stopping the club face being too open at impact? Any tips for stopping the club face?
I most certainly do, to prevent the club face getting too open at impact. This, if there's one of the top 2 or 3 things you'd see most people do as an average, it's this. A couple of thoughts. Number 1, you have to have a grip that helps you do it. There is no perfectly correct grip. John Rahm has a grip that you'd swear would make him slice. He does play a fade, actually, but obviously it's not doing him any harm. So make sure it's down in the fingers enough that the pad of your hand, the meat of your hand, is on top of the grip. Make sure it's wrapped over a little bit. Make sure it's got some angle. It is much easier to close the club face if your grip is over here a little bit. Second thing, don't confuse the feeling of whipping the club with closing it. Many times people do that, but they look very scooped and the face stays open. Get the club in front of you. If you've got one at home, do this and tilt it towards the ground. That's closing the face. That's the feeling you're trying to get in, and do it early and do it a lot till you overdo it. So take whatever that is, not the whole golf swing, and tilt that thing. I think if you practice the grip and what it really feels like to close the face, you're going to help yourself. Sometimes too, just a third thing, you'll see people pull so hard with their arms and chest, there's nothing against which to close the face. So a little bit more stability and a little bit more of a sense of pop the face close probably is a good thing.
Great. Dan Schutz, he asked, what's the easiest way to draw the golf ball?
Draw the golf ball. Like anything, you have to, when you're learning a skill, you have to learn very broad distinctions and then create slight distinctions. So someone that's great on a skateboard, I've never been on a skateboard, can do all kinds of tricks, but that's because they've fallen a lot and they began by doing more mundane things. So if you're going to learn to draw the ball, hey, certainly we know the club face has to be slightly closed in relation to the swing. But start out first by making some small shots, getting what I was just talking about with the previous fella, and getting some little hooks like that. Once you can hook it and smother it a little bit, not only will that help you feel what it's like to draw it, because you just take a little bit of it out, but I think once someone gets good at this, it's a lot easier for them instinctively to swing a little more from the inside. So get your good grip, get a 7-iron or something, make some 2/3 swings and just hook the daylights out of it and then reduce it a bit.
Dwayne Bailey says he hits a lot of his irons fat. Can you help?
Dwayne, hitting irons fat. Well, there's a couple of things you would remember. It's probably two variables. Number one, wherever the club gets to vertical, that's where it's going to hit the ground. If it's going to hit it sometimes it doesn't even hit the ground. It isn't going to hit the ground here and it isn't going to hit the ground there. So if you're going to hit the ground beyond the ball at impact, you need some shaft lean. This is a little exaggerated because then you get the bottom out point beyond the ball. So number one, where are your wrists releasing? And just to dovetail off that for a second, I'm not a fan of just trying to hold angle. You're going to hit the thing with some power, you need some snap down there. So practice not holding angle, but snapping it, but more over here. Put a ball there and snap until you're hitting the ground in this spot. And with that, though, wherever you're located makes a difference too, because obviously your arms are stuck to you. So if you're too far back, that's a handicap. Let yourself shift a little weight and pop the ground in front of the ball, and you should solve that without much difficulty.
We don't promote other products too often, but the divot board and these products that have come out have helped a bunch.
Some good things like that, for sure.
Because if your impact is way behind the ball, it helps promote some better tendencies. It's great. Donnie J.
Beautiful.
Nice and straight. Wasn't even aiming.
I'm a new golfer and have a hard time just getting the ball in play. What's your best tip?
Well, listen, I've played a lot of games and sports, well, not a lot, but a number of sports in my life, and they're all hard in their own ways. They're all hard at the elite level. I think probably just as hard to win Wimbledon as it is to win at Augusta, I suppose. But I would say that trying to get where you just feel somewhat socially comfortable and proficient at golf is probably among the hardest to me. And I think other people would say the same, because you have low margin of error, you have a very long stick, very small sweet spot, very big swing, and a large amount of ground the ball's covering. So it's very common for a new player to really struggle to keep the ball in play. Most of the time, though, it's going to be one of two things that's happening, or a combination. It's either mishitting it, or it's club face unstable or out of alignment at impact. So if you can at least make some small swings and start to create some consistently solid hits, even hitting at 30 yards, and start to get a feel for when the face is open or closed to impact, in other words, where the ball's going, start small, get some consistent contact, and then build up big, you'll do better. But new players, they flail at the ball, they mishit them, the ball goes everywhere a lot of times. Hang in there.
Ferds 099 is the name. Has a major hook. How do I stop hooking the ball?
Major hook. We talked to someone a little while ago that was hooking their mid-irons. And the fact of the matter is, whatever else is happening, the club face is snapping closed too much as you hit the ball. So you've got to figure out some sort of a way. Usually someone that has a major hook gets the club too stuck from the inside. They have to roll their wrist just to hit a decent shot, and often it rolls too much. One other thing you want to remember, audience out there, this applies to hooks and slices, let's assume solid contact. The angle of the club face doesn't just cause curve, it influences to a high extent start direction. So you can swing this way, and if the face is closed enough, it will start straight to slightly left and then go left. So club face is the key, and what I advised the guy earlier to do, experience something that's a little different. Hey, the club face is hard to control at high speed. So if you can come in here and hit some shots where your trail arm, your right arm, is closer to you and more across you, this sort of a little finish here, it is much easier when you get that to hold the face open. Usually the club's way out away from someone when they hook it. So practice that right arm across little punch shots, overdo the fade position maybe, see if you can work your way back in.
Yeah, we've had a couple people ask about hitting the straight ball, so I'll phrase it in a way that I actually have a question too.
Okay.
So a lot of times I'll go to the range and try to see what swing I have that day, what kind of flight I have that day. Is that more encouraged? I mean, should we be chasing, let's say we're all trying to go scratch, and let's say from the 7 to 15 handicap range, should we be chasing the straight ball, or should we?
I think with today's equipment, the way they make balls, and as good as these clubs are, without wind, a good shot should fly fairly straight. If you go to a tour event and you watch on the range and it's not a windy day, there's a little movement or a little bias, but it's not curving a whole lot. So I think we want reasonably straight. We don't want to be, though, stifled and trying to steer the ball. So hey, if I could either hit it 300 yards every time I drove and commensurate with my irons the rest of my life, I'm a little bit old and under-talented for that. But if I was either given that or I was told I could hit it really straight all the time, I'd take the length and then figure out how to hit it straight. I really would. You play better and you'd have more fun that way. So in an attempt to hit it straight, don't take the speed out and steer the ball. Like we've said to a few folks, hey, there's a lot of variables in golf. That's the challenge. And what happens with the human mind is when you hit balls, your mind makes adjustments for problems through trial and error. And I think generally, the more of those false compensations and things, the harder it is to time straight. So if you're really struggling, hey, is it a certain pattern? Is it a lot of hooks? Is it a lot of fades? You could address that. If it's just inconsistency, then what I would look for is, can you make your swing sounder and simpler and less moving parts, less unnecessary movement? Should dial it in. Hey, if you're fading it a little bit, play it. I understand the principle, but it should go reasonably straight without trying to steer it.
Awesome. DJ says,
VJ.
New golfer here, how far should I be standing away from the ball?
Okay, let's talk about that. Let me try a swing here. I would say if you can get some dynamic posture, and this varies a little from player to player, but let's just say look in a golf magazine or something, get a good athletic posture, I feel springy. Then what should happen is your arms literally should just hang from your shoulders, literally straight down, certainly for an iron, maybe slightly out for a driver. Again, there's a few exceptions. Furyk's in here, Arnold Palmer was there, but that's the look, dynamic, arms hanging down, and you're there. One little test you often see people do is take the backhand, the right hand with maybe just a dink of a thumb. It's about like that. But to me, I would base my distance from the ball on that, but I would, first job is dynamic, good posture. So grab a golf magazine or look at YouTube or something and get a look at it, get in front of a mirror and get some good posture.
Perfect. This is Phoenix.
Phoenix.
I hit my irons well, but can't help but slice my driver.
Okay, this is an interesting phenomenon that people tend to experience. The reality, this might be helpful for you folks. I'll relate this to a sand shot and a bunker shot. When a golfer slices their driver, let's assume solid contact and no wind, they don't actually side spin the ball. You'd think they would. What happens is as the club comes in with a slice bias, in the case of a slice, it tilts the axis of the ball. It tilts it like that. If you picture an airplane with a low wing, the ball's actually spinning on its axis, but because the right pole is low, it curves. So that is why a less lofted club will always curve the ball more than a more lofted club, because when you hit nearer the equator, you can tilt the ball more, plus you have more speed. That is also, if we go by, a lot of people find that, hey, I pull my short irons just a bit, but I slice my woods. That's because they swing a little out to in and there's not producing enough curve to really see it on a 9-iron, but with a driver, it starts to really show up. I doubt it's a different swing to your driver. By the way, at sand shots, when you've got a blob or sand and you're, nice open face and you're literally going under the bottom of the ball, that open face doesn't affect alignment much at all. You don't need to aim miles off to the left when you're doing that. You'll notice that. Hopefully that helps your bunker game too.
It's interesting too, when I started playing golf, no one told me, and I didn't know that you should hit your drive up. You should be hitting up on the ball.
That's right.
And I hit the iron so many times, and I liked hitting my irons, the 7 and the 5, the ones that people tend to fall in love with. And a lot of those, you're covering the ball.
Right, you're hitting slightly down on it, yeah.
And I started hitting the driver, and I sliced badly the driver out of nowhere and nothing else because I was still trying to cover the ball, which was making me swing over the top.
Hey, by the way, this brings into something that Kevin was saying. A lot of times people say, hey, this is a weird game where it's a game of opposites. You hit down, the more you hit down, the more the ball goes up. The more you swing left, the more it goes right. That really isn't true. It's just physics, just a stick in a ball. Newton's laws stand unchallenged by the game of golf. What happens is the more you hit down, the lower it goes. But if the ball's laying without a tee, if you don't have slightly a downward hit, it's hard to make solid contact. And it's the solid contact that makes it go up. So with a drive, we don't have that issue. It's up on a tee. We're trying to launch it with some height. So that's why you get back and do just what Kevin was saying, hit just a little up and get a good launch angle. And by the way, if you swing left, the ball goes to the left. If you swing left with the club face wide open, that's a different matter. So it's not as mysterious a game as people think.
Connor Henry is asking, is flipping my hands/wrist at contact necessary? Flipping.
Well, I mean, Connor, I think the thing is, what's necessary is whatever gets the club face square. So, I mean, if you really, doesn't really matter what I think is necessary. What's necessary is that. Now, if you feel like you have to have a lot of hand flip and a lot of slash to not hit it to the right, let's say, there's a good chance either your grip is wrong or the club face could be related to that's coming in too open and you need a lot of flip. So, hey, certainly the club snaps a bit and the left wrist turns under the face, does that. But it shouldn't feel like you have to do tons and tons of that in a flash to get the club face square. Sometimes it does, though.
This is a great question. So, Mr. Front Nine.
Mr. Front Nine.
He used to hit, or he or she, used to hit my irons pure. Now my irons sound like a firecracker when I hit them at impact and has no flight and my hands sting.
Wow.
This happens to me every once in a while on the tee, and I was going to ask the same thing. When it's teed up, I think sometimes it's not teed too high because I know they'll probably be hitting the top, but it does sting, and some of these irons.
I mean, typically what happens on an off-center hit could be toe, heel, low on the face, something like that. The club, you'd be surprised in very slow motion film how much a club will torque and twist when you do that. And people therefore feel like they hit a rock or a stone or a tree root because the club twists in their hands like that. So it could be mishits. It would be a little bit different matter if the ball's flighting well and going straight and you feel like it's in the middle of the club and then it feels like that. That would be a little mysterious. Maybe you've got a little bit of an injury there. So first off, are you getting mishits? You could get a little bit of foot powder or spray chalk on the face, and when you get one of that, spray it every 3-4 shots, and then look down there and say, okay, did I mishit it? That would explain the stingy feeling in the hands and the sense of sort of discomfort. If that isn't the case and they hit pretty solidly, I'd find someone that's a club fitter and get on a launch monitor and see what they're telling you about angle of attack and different things you're doing. Someone that's good with that has a TrackMan or a flight scope can really shed some light on something within 5 or 10 swings. I would do that if it's solid hits and you're feeling that.
I felt some sting in my hands too when I was hitting the ball after the flip, when I was a little early, because my wrists were trying to close or rotate, and I would feel this kind of stinging. So I've been there, Mr. Front Nine. We're answering questions still here. We've got about 20 minutes. We've got one of the best teachers in the world, so I've got a question here. We have, season is, for the rest of we're in beautiful Florida here, but for the rest of the country, they're going to start golfing. You see a lot of people at the center there. Yeah. What's the thing that goes first when they've been dormant in the winter? Is it feel or is it?
Well, I think what we see a lot in South Florida is a little bit older people, which is a lot of the people that have more time on their hands and the money to play golf at a nice course and stuff like that. So I think a lot of times it's physical with them. They're a bit stiff and rickety. They're not in golf loose. Their skin gets a bit sore. So I think one of the things you can do if you're up there in the winter, it kind of speaks to the question because you'd be, if you're not down here in South Florida, Hannah just moved here from Michigan, so great as Michigan is, she's not dealing with this problem this winter. But if you're coming out of the winter, if you do a bit of stretching, get someone that knows what they're talking about, not me, and you do some gripping and practice swinging, keep the hands nice and keep the skin solid, and just keep swinging the club a little bit. We're not talking an hour a day. We're talking 5 minutes here and there. That makes such a difference. If you don't touch those clubs, period, and then you grab it and go to the range and hit 2 buckets and play 18 holes, you're probably going to get a little sore. So that would be one thing. I think you start at the basics. Jack Nicklaus, the great Jack Nicklaus, my boyhood idol, because I was in that era. His boyhood teacher was a guy called Jack Grout, who was he's long since dead, but he was the pro at Scioto Club in Ohio. And he taught Jack since he was a kid. And Jack Grout taught a lot of guys that became good players. So what Nicklaus would do is every spring at the start of the golf season, in those days the tour season was somewhat shorter, he would go to Jack Grout for several days and they would just work on setup, ball position, the basics. Was he holding the club well? Did he look in balance? And just because he hadn't forgotten how to swing, but I'd start with the basics. Get in front of a mirror, get your posture good, make sure you like the way you're holding it and you feel comfortable. And if you get those things right, there's a good chance you'll start to recover your form pretty quickly. So stay swinging the club, stay loose, and work on the basics a little bit.
Awesome. Winston, I have an 8-degree driver, but I
Wow.
still launch it really high. Please help.
Almost certainly, Winston, you probably have quite a bit of club head speed, but without question, you're adding loft through impact. It's just physics. So I would say probably what you'd see on video would be something more like this, where your arms are straight and the club has gone past your hands and you're ripping it up there in the air too much. Now, what we don't want to see happen is you start slamming down on it to hit it lower. But what I would try to do is make some smaller swings where you still feel like you're hitting slightly up and picking it, but you're tilting the face a little bit as you do it. Again, not hitting down. And see if, picture a topspin table tennis shot. You know, the way the racket works like that, swings up and does that. And get some swings where your hands are a little more this way. Get a table tennis racket if you like. Most people can do that with a table tennis paddle, and do it on a small scale till you get it going a little bit. Has to be too much release if 8 degrees going up in the air.
That's great. We've got Mr. Front 9 again.
See, we couch these tips as though we're an expert. You said I'm hitting it too high, and I said, why don't you practice hitting it lower? But we've said it in a little bit more of a
Yes.
PGA fancy way than that.
I like it. What's a neutral baseball grip for those wanting to use that grip instead of the overlap or interlock?
Neutral usually refers more to this, but you're talking about whether you're interlock, overlap, that, or 10 finger. I don't think it matters much. The reason you can say it doesn't matter is because there's been some elite players that do each of those three. If one of them was really bad, you wouldn't see any people winning majors doing that. So baseball is all 10 fingers on the grip, but it shouldn't really change the position inside the hand or the position of the hands this way, which again, there's some options for that. But make sure if you're doing baseball, they're nicely together. Don't start spreading them out like that. To me, that causes problems.
And the follow-up was, he's pulling the ball a lot. So what grip would you suggest for someone that pulls the ball 90% of the time?
Now, strictly speaking, if this is what you're talking about, a pull is a ball that flies fairly straight, but starts to the left and consequently goes to the left. So that would be less to do with the grip if that's the case. That would be much more to do with the swing direction. Remember one thing, if it's solid hit in an absence of significant wind, if the ball's flying at least flight-wise pretty straight, I'm not saying it's at the target, it's indicative of what the direction you're swinging in. So if you're pulling it and it's just flying left and not curving, I wouldn't look at grip. I'd look at my swing direction and try to get the swing coming a little bit more from here.
How do you control a draw?
It's not easy. I've been trying to for 40 years. Well, yeah, again, I think with today's clubs and balls, we mentioned this earlier, you don't see players curve it much. I mean, a couple of them move it a little bit. You'd certainly see players that have a propensity to miss more on one side, and that's valuable. You don't want to feel like it's an equal amount of misses when you're in a tournament. You might feel equal amount of misses developing skill, but if you're drawing it too much, hey, you've got to try to probably swing less from the inside and certainly less face rotation. So we said to a couple of guys and gals tonight, if you make some little swings where your arms are a little more across your tummy, some little punches like this, you watch someone hit on tour hitting a little knockdown shot. They're much more like this than they are like that when they want to control the club. And get a little feeling of cutting it, or at least knocking the draw out, and then go back to drawing it and just keep fiddling with it. Tell you a quick anecdote, if it won't be too boring. You may or may not, you audience out there, have heard of a great player of his day called Jackie Burke. Jackie Burke is about 98 or 9 now. He won at Augusta, he won the PGA, won probably 20 tour events. Great friend of Ben Hogan's, pretty legendary guy. And I was lucky enough one day to spend a couple of hours with him because the pro I was with, long story, used to work for Jackie, and it was a rainy day and we were over at the Champions in Houston. So I'll make this reasonably quick. But anyway, I asked him about Hogan and practice and what he was like to be around. He didn't have a video camera, and he gave me a funny story. He gave me and John a funny story about him changing grips between events and things like that. But he looked at us both, it's about 15 years ago, and he said to us, now, this guy's won 2 majors and many tour events. And he said, now, never forget, this will always be a game of constant adjustments with a stick and a ball. It's just, you're a human being in a low margin for error game. You're just not going to wake up next Tuesday and feel exactly like you did on the back 9 today. So that's part of the charm of it. if you find aggravation charming, but that's just part of what you deal with, and it's part of the fun. That's the way it is. Just to go on for a second, what helps people, you're going to have that. Jackie Burke said that, but what helps people is when they know what their tendencies are and they have some sense of ball flight laws, they can hone in to a couple of fairly specific areas where they need more of this or less of that. They're still experimenting, they're still playing, trying to find the field, but they're doing it intelligently and in it with some organized thinking. If you just randomly pick anything out of your mind, or a friend said this and you have no idea what your swing looks like, it would be like going into a drugstore at night and just picking some medicine off and saying, I hope this helps. Well, maybe it won't, you know, so I don't know if that helps. The great Jackie Burke.
Cole Boone. What's the best drill to stop early extension in the swing?
Best drill to stop early extension. Extension is this. This is flexion. This is extension. Now, if you look at the side of a golfer, there's bend, there's flexion, right? Nobody sets up like that that's any good. But when you get the side view mid follow through, you won't see anybody that's any good doing that. They all look like they've pushed their hips under them and extended. Some a little bit more than others, and probably a little bit more for a driver than, say, a pitching wedge or something. So early extension, if you picture the target line here and the target there, is when the hips extend more towards the target line rather than coming around and doing it towards the target. Does that make sense? So you need some extension, but not too early. There could be several causes. One of them possibly is balance is bad. You're in your heels and your body's moving for balance, but probably more likely your subconscious mind is trying to fight something in the swing. And most times, if someone's fairly athletic, when the club starts to get too steep, in an attempt to redirect it back to the back of the ball, that's when you see that a lot. And generally, with a really top-notch player, when they're out of position, you'll see it more in the upper body, less in the hips. But I would say you're battling the club getting steep, if I had to bet, and that's part of your swing. When something won't go away and you keep working on it, there's usually a reason for it. You probably need it. So see if you can fix your plane a little bit and then work on that.
Jake Danish. How do I fix an open club face when adjusting my grip?
Okay. Jake, fixing an open club face with the grip. The rule of thumb is this. Let's assume you get the grip down in the, well, let's not assume. Let's get the grip a little bit down in the fingers. When it's down there, your hand will wrap over more. But generally, a strong grip, from my perspective, is the hands, and I'd say both, are more to the right, more away from the target over there. What happens is the more they're here, the more I can twist the club closed as I swing. If I had a steering wheel and I had to jerk the car to the left, which is like hooking it, I'd grab the wheel here and pull the thing over there. So you don't want to get it contrived and miles over here, but you certainly want to feel like there's some cup in the wrist, and the wrist is, well, the V here is pointed more at that back shoulder, and the wrists are mobile, the grip's in the fingers. Then you should be able to close it.
What causes me to block the ball out to the right as a right-handed golfer?
Okay, blocking the ball to the right. I know a little bit about this because I've done a lot of this in my little golf life. And this is a fellow was asking about early extension, and maybe even a lady a few minutes ago. Early extension is when the hips move towards the golf ball. It's often the case when someone's blocking it because that motion sends the club to the right. Now, sometimes people are coming down steeply and that kind of offsets it. But a lot of times when a golfer does that, the club gets going this way. I mean, we know the club's going in that direction or you wouldn't be blocking it, right? It's not like you're slicing it there. So if you can try to feel, and I'm going to assume a handful of things, your backswing's reasonable, the start of the downswing, the grip, etc. But if you can try to feel, not coming over the top, but that in this bottom half of the swing, it's more circular and more around you, so it's exiting lower. It's not exiting there so much. That's what you want to work on. And usually you'll find the more you stay over it and turn, the rounder your follow through gets. Obviously this is exaggerated. The more you extend, the more the club will go out to the right. So try to get that follow through a little rounder, that through swing, if you can. Anything else there, guys?
Let's take a couple more. How do I take the club back less after years of a massive takeaway? I'd love to be parallel.
It gets really long and past parallel. A lot of people do this. The most common thing I see is that golfers don't set their wrists well. Usually the grip's up in the palm. They sort of snatch their arms back, and when they look kind of like this going back, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to hit the ball a really short distance because you don't have any wrist hinge, but far more likely the golfer gets used to using momentum and energy to load the club, and it bounces and loads all by itself. And when it does, it bounces a lot. It usually bends the arms and often topples the body. So get some pivots where they're nice and disciplined, they don't straighten up. I'll choke down here. As you go back, if you've got a good grip, you should be pushing the grip end of the club away from you to bend it like that. So your arms should be pushing out this way. And if you get a good hinge and you stay in a good pivot, I think you'll really, in a good firm structured position, I think you can start to shorten that backswing that way.
Awesome.
There could be other reasons, but that's the likely one.
One more question here.
Okay.
Adam, I keep duck hooking my drives. Please help. We kind of talked through that.
Yeah, we've talked through hooks a little bit. Don't know if you've been with this thing a lot. And by the way, I mentioned this earlier. I get out on the road and do some mini schools all over the place. You go to adambgolf.com and you want to get some information. The information isn't right there, but you can register with us and say, hey, I'm interested in schools out on the road. Be happy to watch you in private, bring a video camera or with a small group. Duck hooking the drive, hey, and a driver, we said this earlier, can curve the ball a lot more than a wedge or a 7-iron can. Clearly, though, the club face is flashing closed. There could be several reasons. You could have a grip situation. Probably not, though. Most people don't have such a strong grip that happens. What usually happens is the golfer gets off balance or stuck, or the club gets behind them, something that causes them to have to shut down and try to scramble at high speed, subconsciously scramble to get the club on the ball. And when the club gets excessively active at the bottom and you're stuck, pretty easy to snap the club face over. So try to do some practice swings, hey, where certainly you want to release the club, but you feel like your arms are in front of you as you get to the bottom. Legs are a little bit more stable so that you can engage your core and control the club a little bit more through the shot. And you don't wind up with too much flashing of the hands and the club head through the ball.
Perfect. We're going to stay on TikTok, so hold on for a second.
So staying on TikTok
we'll turn off YouTube because it's around the
Thanks,
hour.
everyone. I'm sorry if there was difficulty with the questions, but I hope that was somewhat enjoyable for you.
So you've got Adam's website we'll be posting. This is the app in the App Store. If you don't have the Scratch Golf Academy
the Scratch Golf Academy app's fun. Got great tools, tempo trainer, putting tempo trainer. We're at the Lag Shot studio, so you can certainly go to the Lag Shot website, or at the Scratch Golf Academy app. They've got a whole training course we've got on using the Lag Shot, and it's all kind of wrapped in there. So I hope you'll check it out.
Awesome.